Hello again and welcome to Talkin Walks. Today's episode is a special edition. I won't be walking through villages or towns or open countryside or the coast because this weekend it's Remembrance Sunday here in the UK. So today we're going on a walk through a superbly reconstructed World War I trench right here at the Kent Event Centre in Detling. This project was started a couple of years ago by a group called CEMA, the Centre for Experimental Military Archaeology. Let's not hang about, let's go and see it now. But this area is work in progress, so this will eventually become a German trench. Right, so here we are with Darren, who is a volunteer,
Yep.
and who's kindly agreed to talk to us about why he's here and why he got into.
I got into this. I've always had an interest in history, mainly World War II, and with the centenary of the First World War, I was at Military Odyssey at this showground, and I met a bunch of World War I German reenactors. Got chatting to them, and they said, if you want to join us, come along.
So now I'm going to talk to the chief, the top man in this area, Dale, who is the major, and we'll put him on right now. So, Dale, may I ask you, how did you get into this?
I got into reenacting because I was a historian, so I've written some books on First World War artillery, and I took part in a shoot where we marked the end of one of the battles in the First World War by firing an 18-pounder field gun that actually happened in France, the event in 2017, and I had to buy a complete set of uniform for it, because once you've got the uniform, then you're on the slippery slope. You've got it all, and it just gets more and more. There was the opportunity to work with Andy on the trench, and as a historian it's very interesting because it's experimental archaeology. You're trying to understand how things were done in a particular period in history, and speaking as an author and a historian, it's very easy to glide over the cracks. You can just jump effortlessly from one thing to another. If you're actually doing it for real, you start to wonder, how did the Romans actually get on their horses, or how did this piece of armour fit to something else? And in the case of the trench, how exactly was this built or that built or what have you? So once you start doing experimental archaeology, all sorts of questions start bubbling up, and it also just gives you a completely different appreciation of what you're writing about. I mean, when I'm wearing my First World War uniform, I walk in a completely different way, and there are things I can't do. So it's quite difficult for me to run. It's nearly impossible for me to crawl. So therefore I tend to walk around very erect, sort of bearing, upright and officerly. I have a collar and tie, I have a tailored jacket, and all of that affects the way that you move. And I think it's something that actors find, is that when you put the costume on, you actually move in a different way, and that way is true to the period that you're representing. You kind of become that character. You do indeed. I think the thing that struck me about here is that it's all these little things, like for example the binoculars that you just kindly pointed out were made by Dolland. So we've got two sets of binoculars here. This one is made by Dolland, and the pair on my belt is made by Atchison. So when you see Dolland and Atchison doing people's contact lenses, this is in fact two separate companies who during the First World War made optical equipment.
Incredible. And it's that minutiae that makes this so fascinating. You know, little things. As you walk around here, you see little things, and you ask a question of someone like yourself who's here all the time, and it's amazing. For example, this contraption here, which I asked you about earlier, I wondered what it was. I thought it was
the signal shutter.
Some kind of protection vest, but it's certainly not.
Bulletproof vest. No, it's
exactly.
only thin canvas. No, At the start, you said that I was the person in charge here. I'm not. I'm an artillery major, so I have come forward from my artillery battery in order to direct the battery's fire.
Okay.
So the major, who commanded a battery of 4 or 6 field guns, actually commanded the firing of those guns, and originally that was done by standing on the gun line with the guns on either side of you. During the course of the First World War, this changes, so the guns are moved back for their own safety. So from where we are here, they'd be 2,000 yards in that direction.
Okay.
So I have to come forward now to find targets for my guns and adjust the fire of the guns. And that means I need to communicate with the battery. So everything that you see here is state-of-the-art communication equipment. So the easiest thing to carry that we can move quickly through the woods with is a signalling shutter, which is just a piece of canvas that rolls up. When we pull this, it goes white, and we can signal in Morse code, and that just props up on a rifle.
Yeah.
We've got telephones which give us the best communication,
Yep.
but in order to connect with the battery, we've got to unroll cable which joins us to the battery. So
Sure.
the trenches, all the supply routes, everywhere was festooned with miles and miles of cables, because I can only talk to my battery. If I had another major next to me, he could only talk to his battery. So
Right.
each phone would be connected to a battery, each major would be shooting his own battery. It's different from how it's done nowadays.
Sure.
Today we can control all of the guns at once by radio,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
in those days it was one OPIP, as they called them, observation post, controlled one battery.
Sure. Right. Okay. So
And then the
you would
final
direct the
thing
fire
is,
from here.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And the final thing is a daylight signalling lamp, a Lucas lamp,
Yeah.
which is this thing here, which again is in Morse code, and the lamp is set up there, and
Yeah.
that will go to another lamp, which will then pass the signal on to another lamp, which will then pass it back to the battery.
And
that's
how
how
far
we
away
communicate.
would these
The
other comrades of yours
we'd
be?
have to go 2,000 yards, which might not necessarily be a particularly long distance, but when we're all sort of lying in trenches and
Yeah.
trying not to get hit by shrapnel fire,
Sure.
that can be quite challenging. And also you sometimes would zigzag, so it'd actually be longer
Yeah.
by the time we got there, and you'd have a Royal Engineers signaller at each point minding a length of line or repeating the signal. So he would receive the signal, pass it on to the next Royal Engineers signaller, and it was done by the Royal Engineers because they were the technical pods.
Incredible.
The
So-
artillery fired the guns, looked after the horses, the Royal Engineers did all the telephony and things like that. And I wouldn't operate the telephone. What I would do is fight with my map, my compass, my protractors, which is how I would adjust the fire. So
Sure.
the guns may be directly behind me, in which case I can tell them go left or right or up or down, but they may also be at an angle, in which case I've got to do calculations to work out what is left or right to me may in fact be up or down, backwards and forwards for the guns. So
Sure.
it's my job to do those calculations here in the trench, and then tell my Royal Engineers signaller to send that information back to the battery.
Incredible. Yeah. And how would you get the information of where to fire them? What would
you've
be
got
your
to
tools for?
You've got to spot a
establishing
target. So
Yeah.
the way to do that in a trench is using a periscope. So you'd actually look up over the top of the trench and then scan until you could see, for example, you might see a set of bayonets moving along the trench, which could be German troops moving forward to reinforce.
Yeah.
Ideal target. So we might have registered that bit of trench already. So we might have just adjusted fire on it so that I can then just give a code name. So I can say target battery, volley fire, because it's different to the way it's done nowadays, shrimp, and that might be
And that would be the code for-
that would be the code.
Yeah,
They would
yeah.
then know back at the battery from their grid reference which of the targets that is, lay each of the guns individually on that target and then fire. Then I would observe, and I've got graticules in here that represent degrees on the ground. So I would then observe and think, right, okay, we've got to move that way a bit, or we've got to move that way a bit, or we're a bit short, or a bit long, and then send that information back to the battery.
Incredible. Yeah. Amazing.
And of course there were other people observing, so you'd have people up in balloons observing for the very long range guns.
Okay.
So they're looking right into German held territory, and for the extreme long range guns, the ex-naval ones that are mounted on railway carriages and things like that, they would fire off the map. So they would have the grid reference of a town with a railway junction in it, and they would then fire onto that. And the chances are they wouldn't know whether their shells are hitting or not, but bearing in mind the shells are about that size, it didn't matter that much.
Yeah.
The ones that I'm firing are this size. Oh. So that's an 18-pounder shrapnel shell, that's the business bit of it, and this is the bit that propels it out of the gun. So that comes.
So when you see trench art, it's this part that
it's that part.
Used. Yeah.
So that is what's loaded into the gun. So 2,000 yards back that way, my guys are sitting behind their guns, ready to load one of those into the gun.
Yeah.
When it's fired, that then comes out, and this is ejected backwards. And as you say, that's called salvage because they can be reused, but they can also be turned into trench art, which is why they get turned into.
And that's quite a substantial thing to be landing near where you are.
Yeah, so
is that a fuse at the top?
100 million of these ones were fired, which is almost beyond belief. You can see how complicated the fuse is.
Yeah.
That's because it's a time fuse, because this has to burst in the air above the enemy.
Right.
And it operates like a shotgun, because inside, we talk about shrapnel. Normally what we really mean by shrapnel nowadays is shell fragments, because real shrapnel is that.
Oh, like musket balls.
Yeah. So you'd have 275 of those in here with a bursting charge behind it. I would calculate the exact time, say 18 seconds, that the guys would then set on here. So they would set that ring to 18 seconds, and at 18 seconds that would blow the end off and all of those balls would come out downwards. So what the effect is like having a shotgun burst in the air above you.
Yeah.
And this is why we have trenches in the First World War. It's not because of machine guns. Machine guns were not used in that quantity in the early days, but this stuff was. And this is also why you have steel helmets, because these were originally called shrapnel helmets. And each British one is proofed by firing 1/2 inch ball at it to make sure that it really is actually bulletproof armoured steel. So they were proofed at the a sample, because not every single one of them, but they were proofed. So that's shrapnel.
Those coming at you, would you?
The other thing that we would fire is high explosive, and high explosive actually hits the impact, detonates, and the thing explodes, and that has an effect from the blast and also from the fragmentation coming off here. And if you're firing into trenches, for example, that's a much more useful type of shell. In the initial stages of the First World War, the 18-pounder barely had any high explosive shells at all. It was all the business was going to be done with shrapnel. And that's why people ended up digging themselves into trenches to protect themselves from that.
That's really great information. I didn't know that at all. I had no idea. I thought it was all from the fragments of the shell only. So
and it's understanding what a technical war the First World War was. That things were evolving. I mean, the war only lasted 4 years. Is what people forget. It's a very, very short time. You think of the duration of lockdown. I mean. You put a year either side of lockdown, you got the First World War. During that time, we went from aeroplanes that could just fly over the Channel and crash to multi-engine bombers that could fly the Atlantic. I mean, it is staggering how fast. So people were racing to keep up with the technology and to find ways of using it. So things were being invented, but you then had to work out how that could be applied to the battle that you're actually fighting. So the point of this little display is really just giving an opportunity to say these guys weren't just fighting each other with fixed bayonets. There is a very, very scientific war going on.
And that is really the conception of a lot of the public, that it was just bayonets and that was that. And bullets, but there was so much more.
And also that everyone was in the trenches. I mean, a lot of people weren't. They were back behind the lines. They might still be in harm's way. But my artillery battery, for example, would be 2,000 yards that way. A heavy battery would be another 2,000 yards behind that. And then you've got all of the little railway lines and things like the one that we've got set up in the woods there, bringing ammunition forward and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of people in the administrative tail who are still very much doing their bit for the war, but they're not actually with Baldrick and Blackadder in the trenches.
No, I think everybody thinks that 99% of people were in the trenches, and the others were way back.
Yeah, it's more the other way around.
Yeah, no, that's lovely.
So that's the display.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Really
Thank you
appreciate
for visiting
it.
us.
Thank you. Cheers.
So this is the MG08. Now this is the quintessential German heavy machine gun of World War One. It first came into service in, guess what, 1908, which is why it's called an MG08. It's based on what was the standard design of just about every single machine gun of World War One, which is the Maxim. Now basically, as you can see here, you've got the belt. Now the standard belt was 250 rounds and that would be fed through, and this had a rate of fire of approximately 500 rounds a minute, though that can be varied. There's what's called a fusée spring on the other side of it, and that can be adjusted, and that can vary the firing rate from as low as 350 up to a maximum of about 500, 550. You can see under the big metal sleeve on the top, I'll explain what that is in a minute, is the water jacket. The water jacket basically contained 5 pints, and the idea was that the water would keep the barrel cool when it was firing, because the big problem with these guns is once they start firing continuously, they heat up. After about 500 rounds, the water will start to approach boiling point, and then it will start to boil off. And again, on the other side, you can just see it here. Here's one of the kettles, and you can see the pipe that feeds into it. And as the water boils off into the kettle, it basically turns back into water, and you can then recharge the water jacket from these kettles. Now, originally the kettles were not designed to just collect the water, they were designed to hide the steam, because once it starts producing lots of steam, it's a giveaway to the enemy where you are. It's like waving a flag. And so it's not just about recycling the water, it is also about making sure that you're not giving away the position from the steam. Yes, you are getting some muzzle flash, but the muzzle booster was quite effective at reducing the amount of flash that you would see. On top of the barrel, you've got the sleeve, and that was designed so that any incoming bullets would be deflected. It's as much to protect the sleeve as it is the gunner himself, because if the sleeve is perforated, it will start leaking out water, and you don't want to lose water. The barrels were good for about 5,000 to 6,000 rounds, then they would need to be changed out. And over here you can see in that red case you've got a spare barrel, and any gun team would have 4 spare barrels, and they would therefore be able to replace the barrels. It would be extremely unusual to go through more than 14 to 15,000 rounds in a day, and so the spare barrels were more than adequate for any day's firing, and that would only be on something like the first day of the Somme or something. Sure. Quite often you'd only be firing a few hundred rounds a day. So there you go.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Really informative. And this is an original gun.
This is an original. Yeah, I should have said that. This is the real thing. This is a 1918 made in DWM, which means it's Spandau. And so this was a real gun. Everything you're actually looking at is original, with the exception of the shield. So this is an original 1918 stand. This is an original 1918 gun. It's an original 1917 sight, which still works. The belt and the boxes and the kettles are all original. all of this saw service.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you. So here I am with a couple of dedicated guys that regularly come down to this and support this event, and they're just going to say who they are and tell us a little bit about themselves. So,
Right, so I'm Tim.
And
I'm Adrian.
Tim and Adrian, thank you. And how long have you been involved in this?
In this we've been involved about the last 2 years for once a month. But reenacting, Tim's got about 25, 30 years and I've got 35, 40 years experience reenacting in different groups
Sure.
and through different ages, and this is the ultimate one to
You
portray something of our age and what we should be doing.
Excellent. And you buy your own, you have your own collections of various items from the First World War. And how often do you do this during the year, would you say?
Well, this will be a few times a year because the main thrust is doing the World War II impressions during the summer, and then this is when we're available to help come along and do this as well.
Sure. It's a great thing that you do because it gives the public, and kids especially, a chance to see what it was really like in the trenches.
All this is private purchased, it's all our own equipment.
That's real dedication and commitment. So I'm
Storage, petrol, sitting in the trench when it's raining, snowing.
sure.
So
Yeah.
it's just something different to do, and it's good to come down and talk to your mates and just talk general rubbish about what's happening in the world.
Absolutely. And who are you portraying now today? What side are you on?
You answer
And
that
what
one.
rank would you be?
So we're a Scharfschützen Maschinengewehrabteilung, the 22nd, which is literally a sharpshooting machine gun section. And basically we would be about 2 kilometers behind the main trenches, and what we were doing is literally denying territory to the enemy by firing the machine guns up at an angle and dropping the rounds onto them. So the machine gun over there has a range of up to 4,300 meters, which is fairly impressive.
It certainly is.
And basically you have your elevation tables, you have the maps, you work out where the enemy are, and a whole bunch of you just fire into that area to deny the enemy that piece of ground. It might be an area where soldiers are assembling to attack your trenches, or it might be in support of one of your assaults going in, where you basically just want to soften up the opposition before your guys go in.
Sure.
And the real thing about the Scharfschützen is that they're supposed to be back between the front line and the second line of the trenches, and even between the second and third line of trenches. You're not supposed to be in the front. And what you would do is you would put your machine gun into a position that's prepared, camouflaged, because the moment they spot you, you are just a magnet for every single bit of artillery, aircraft coming over to bomb you. So you basically don't want to be seen.
Okay, well, I'm preparing the meal for 10 people here. We've got a Dixie bubbling away with a McConaughey stew. Got a cup of coffee bubbling there. basically this is the setup it would be like in an officer's or an NCO's dugout. Usually 4 people would be here, one person on the wireless, 2 people trying to sleep, 1 person basically whether cleaning the weapon or doing other work, but it's just the way it is. We just live here, the condensation drips off the ceiling.
Yeah.
It's
And the stove that you're using, all the utensils, stuff, is just as it would have been.
basically it's the same equipment, basic, and
Yeah.
no, it's excellent.
Oh, that's great. And you're spoiling the crew today with a home cooked meal in exactly the way it would have been done.
It's definitely, yes, absolutely, yes. So, yes.
Oh, that's really amazing. It looks fantastic. So we're just having a quick talk with Andy, who is the director of SEMA, who kindly allowed me to come along and film here today. This fantastic site, and I recommend it to all of you. Come along and see it when you can. Andy, a couple of questions if I may.
By all means.
Could I ask you, why did you start this? What was the inspiration that made you start this project?
A combination of things. It was effects of actually COVID combined with Brexit, combined with the fact that actually I'm interested in communicating with the audience about the reality of the Great War. And I've spent many, many years working in museums, writing books, but this is doing something in basically real time, in real space. And the idea was that people couldn't get to Belgium. If they could get to Belgium at the time, allowing for Brexit, it was more and more difficult to get there actually.
Sure.
And therefore school groups could come here in a day, experience something of the reality of trench warfare, and then be back in school in the evening. So it all came together, and it was a series of coincidences, but it was something I'd always wanted to do. I'd done it once before, but actually this was the biggest project so far.
The common misconceptions that people have about what it was like in the trench compared to, you know, what they see on movies and the reality of it.
I interviewed a soldier a long time ago now in 1970 when I was 14. He said, my war boy, 90% bored stiff, 9% frozen stiff, 1% scared stiff. We see 1% of the war. We don't actually see the reality, which is really very mundane. It's living in a hole in the ground for 5 days at a time. My granddad was a soldier for 1,000 days, 100 days in the trenches, 5 days in combat. Therefore, the 90% board stiff, I'm sure, is much more accurate than we normally expect.
And can I ask you one other question? How long did the soldiers on average spend in an actual trench? Was it the duration of the war?
No,
was
no,
it
no.
a month? Was it a week? Or?
Well, the time spent in the trench was normally 5 days. Early in the war it was much longer. They realised it wasn't working because the only time you sleep is in the afternoon after you've had your dinner, sleep to tea time, and then working all night, digging, guarding, whatever you're going to do. So therefore 5 days, 4 hours, 5 hours sleep a night. At the end of 5 days you are pretty useless. So then you go away probably for 20 days or more before you come back to your trenches. And behind the lines you are resting. That means basically you're a dog's body. Some people said actually in a quiet sector being in the front line was preferable.
Oh wow, amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for today, Andy, and I look forward to getting this online and getting more people along to come and see this amazing site.
Thank you.
Talkin.